Welcome to the Andy Staples Show. Happy middle of draft week. We're in hump day of draft week. The first round is Thursday night. It is almost here. And we've got the guy who knows all the secrets of the scouts and the position coaches in college and in the NFL. Bruce Feldman from The Athletic. He's here. He's the guy who probably first told you about Ickey Ekwonu. You're going to hear all about him over the next 2 days. The first you probably heard of him, unless you're an NC State fan, was probably from Bruce last year. And Bruce, was it doing this thing that you started hearing all the praise for Ickey?
It was not so I've been doing two different stories for The Athletic for drafts now for the last 2 years. One, which ran this week, was the Draft Confidential, which is really heavy on talking to NFL coaches and scouts. The one that was kind of the trigger for the Ickey for me last year was one which is it's the mock draft, but it's really under the guise of talking to mostly college coaches.
Right.
And now what was crazy to me was, as you remember, Virginia Tech had a really good offensive tackle, Christian Darrisaw.
Yep.
And I was asking ACC coaches about him. And the first time somebody was talking about an NC State kid, and we just kept going. And, you know, the conversation was what it was. And I got off the phone. I was like, I don't know of an NC State offensive lineman in the draft that they should be talking about. And then
you found out he's not in the draft.
Yeah. And I didn't even know who, because he kept on saying the NC State kid is this and described it. And I have all this in my notes. And then I don't know, maybe it was the next day, maybe it was later that night. I talked to another ACC coach because all while this is going, I'm talking to other, asking about other players too, to different coaches. And somebody else said, yeah, but that NC State kid, man, he is different. And I was like, then I started going down the road of, what number is he? 70, and then I was like, oh, this must be who it is. It's a second-year sophomore who was not a big recruit. He was a 3-star out of high school. And, then all of a sudden it became everybody I asked in the ACC, that became about the NC State kid. And they were gushing. And I was like, all right, I got a story here. And to be perfectly honest, I had never heard of him until that. He wasn't a first-team All-ACC. He was third-team All-ACC, which Dave Doran, his head coach, was incredulous by. When I would talk to some NFL personnel people about him, they were like, yeah, I think, it's like they hadn't done much on him, if in anything. Yeah. And the reaction was, oh, he's probably a guard. And Dwayne Ledford, who is an NFL offensive line coach now, but as you well know,
he was Louisville's OC.
But he was at NC State and recruited him, and then went with Satterfield to Louisville. And he knows what an NFL lineman looks like. He played in the NFL, and he was like just gushing about Ickey. Everybody gushes about Ickey. And so our story went up, and all of a sudden, like Ben Fennell and a lot of these people who do a lot of draft stuff, and especially Ben is really good with digging up all sorts of video. And it was like there was a lot of like maulings that people were.
It was fun. It was a good time on Twitter as people just unearth more and more clips of Ickey destroying people. But he's an interesting prospect. And, this is a guy who could be a top 5 prospect, or he could be top 10, depending on what teams need and which teams that are drafting offensive linemen, what they want in the guy they pick in that first pick. And your Draft Confidential this week's interesting because there's a split. Like, you've got O-line coaches who are like, I love this guy. And scouts were like, I don't see it.
Yeah, I had one scout who was just like, thought he was very overrated, and just was like, yeah, he's talented and he's got athleticism and quickness, but he plays in a crappy league. He didn't use crappy. Liked Evan Neal and Charles Cross more. And I was like, huh. And this was one particular scout. It wasn't like I've talked to 8,
right?
But it surprised me. And this is a guy I've known for a long time. And, he's been really spot on a lot of positions before. And so I talked to another line coach later that night and brought that up. And he was like, you know what? I think this is why it is. Coaches love him. The scouts and the personnel people probably don't love him because of what he looks like. He was like, he's really knock-kneed. His knees cave in. He's a little thin-legged. And he goes, when I first saw him, and this is an offensive line coach going, how the heck, and not heck, is this
Yeah.
guy possibly the first pick? He goes, but then when he starts moving and you see how he's crazy athletic, and you couple that with what you see on the film, he's like, this guy is unreal. And people love how intelligent he is. Now, there's a lot of stuff that he, in pass protection, he'll need to clean up. He's still young, but I would be surprised, based on everything I've heard, if Ickey is not an elite NFL lineman very soon. And because just he may not be 6'6" or 6'7", but he's got really long arms to begin with. He's really athletic. Remember, there's a video on my old Ickey story of him running the anchor leg of a guy who's like, Chris Vanini size, crazy, optics. So NC State fans, you were way ahead of the curve. And look, I think he's going to be a great player based on everything I've seen, know, and heard.
Well, let's talk about the first pick in the draft, because popular opinion, all the betting lines seem to have moved to Travon Walker from Georgia being the number one guy for the Jags. Aiden Hutchinson was the presumed number one guy for a while. Kayvon Thibodeau was the presumed number one guy, going back a year, but then he's fallen. It seems like the Jags are going defense and line and probably edge rusher first. What did people tell you about Walker that, makes this sudden rise make sense?
I think the biggest thing, Andy, is for a lot of people, if you were talking about what a top 3 pick or a number 1 overall pick needs to have, there has to be some real wow factor athletically. And he is that. He is 275 pounds. He's got incredibly long arms. He is explosive. He runs extremely well. He is violent. He plays the run very well. I don't think anybody questions, does he disappear in games, his effort, anything like that. They know he can be a real force. I think there are some questions about, like, was the system he played in at Georgia ideal for who he is? Maybe he would be, probably not, but he did a lot of the dirty work, and he was a really terrific player on an amazing defense. I think people would like to see more production. But aside from Nakobe Dean, who's is an interesting story unto himself, you didn't see, and because there were so many stars on that Georgia defense, it wasn't like one guy beyond Nakobe who just was like the wow guy. And then he goes to the combine and he shows he is that wow guy. And so most people I talked to said, I could see him as the first pick in the draft or the second pick in the draft, because the guys who tend to be that in D linemen have some wow factor. Whereas the flip side, Aiden Hutchinson, who's a terrific athlete with crazy change of direction ability, and he's strong, but he does not have the arm length. It's interesting. Arm length for a D lineman, hand size for a quarterback can set people off.
Yes. Well, and offensive linemen too, because the Tyler Linderbaum arm length thing has been beaten into the ground. This is a guy, if a zone scheme team drafts him, he will start for them for 10 years as long as he's healthy. And the arm length thing won't matter. But you talk to people and they're like, well, he's got really short arms.
Yeah. And the one thing that came up to me, Andy, and I got this from the other story I did, which was, he did, against Michigan, because they had a big, if he's covered up by a big nose, that can give him some problems. If he's not, he is really athletic and, gets compared to Jeff Saturday, and he's going to play in a bunch of Pro Bowls, and everybody likes him. I think there's a little hesitation just against, how's he going to do? If he's Vita Vea is there, well, good luck. There's not going to be.
I was going to say he's going to reach block Vita Vea because he ain't blocking him straight up, and guess what? No one else is either.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing you can do. But it is fascinating how much that particular thing, and like the hand size thing you mentioned, and we may as well get to quarterbacks because everybody wants to talk about quarterbacks. Kenny Pickett. A hand size thing seemed to come up quite a bit with the folks you talked to. And it's one of those things where it sounds like people who even don't really make much of a thing about it do with him, because that measurement is much smaller than what they usually see.
Yeah. And so, the first guy I talked to who's been in the business a long time, and I really respect his opinion, I was surprised at how much he was kind of like, I really like Kenny Pickett, but the hand size does concern me, and said, look, you can go back and look this up yourself. But in the last 20 years, there's only been 3 quarterbacks with hands that small who've been taken in the first 3 rounds. Michael Vick, ultra freak athlete, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it was 2 other guys who didn't really do anything in the NFL, right? I mean, I think Chris Winkie was a 4th round pick, and he's
and old.
And old, yeah. That's another knock we're not going to get into.
No offense, Chris.
Yeah,
if you're listening.
But it's like, what, and then he talked about, look, he had a lot of fumbles at Pitt. And when I brought up to a second quarterback coach, he said, and he referenced another one of his colleagues who's a quarterback coach in the NFL, and said they have a quarterback with hands that were a little bigger, but not, were a little bigger. And it is a cold weather place. And he said, that is a concern. Our quarterback has dropped footballs in cold weather places and has fumbled. And it's something where we do think about it. And so, do you think about it saying, all right, we like everything else, he'd be the number 22 pick, but the hand size gives us enough pause where we wouldn't think of going up to number 17 for him. I don't know where, how evaluators sort out that metric, because I've heard really good things about his leadership skills. He's a good athlete. He's played a lot. He's played in a pro style system, but the hand size was, I don't know if it's a deal breaker to some, but it was definitely, if it's not a red light, it's definitely a yellow one.
So I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and the answer to this may be the same for you, and the answer to this may be different for you, but I'm curious how you, based on the people you've talked to, what you'd say here. You're selecting a quarterback in this draft to be your starter for the next 10 years, but not necessarily this year. Who do you pick? And you're selecting a quarterback in this draft and he needs to start this year. Who do you pick?
If Malik Willis is very interesting, but and the guys I've talked to for my story, all said, if you're taking Malik coming from Liberty, what he did, you really need to, for his sake and your sake, you probably need to do what the Eagles did for Jalen Hurts. And it's a little more college-y if you're doing that than what you're asking. I would be, of the 5 quarterbacks, let's say there's 5, Pickett, Sam Howell, Desmond Ritter, Malik, and Matt Corral. Kenny Pickett would be the guy. I would be less freaked out about the hand size, knowing that, all right, there may be a drop ball here or there, and it may cost you, but decision-making is really good. He's a leader. I think he's very mature. If you're saying, I got to have a guy who's playing now, Desmond Ritter, as much as there's a lot to really like, the accuracy part for me is a real concern.
Yeah.
And, there's a really interesting, it's more than just a quote. It's almost like a anecdote in this story about Josh Allen. And, Josh Allen's the one guy who significantly seems to have improved his accuracy. Josh Allen and Desmond Ritter are both trained by Jordan Palmer. And this particular quarterback coach said, I think that's a little bit of, he didn't use the term red herring, but I will here, in that I don't think you can get that much more accurate. Yeah, Josh Allen's numbers are better. First, he's a freak athlete. Second of all, the offense, they have a lot of easy throws built in. There was a big jump when they got Stephon Diggs. Stephon Diggs gets crazy wide open.
Well, and Dable had Jalen Hurts as a sophomore at Alabama. So he may have had some experience
with him
kind of adjusting.
Yeah. And but with Stephon Diggs causes so much problems for defenses, other guys get more open because of the stress he puts on it. So, of those guys, I would say Kenny Pickett. Sam Howell is interesting to me too. As you read in the story, people think he has the best field vision of anybody in this group, even though he's only 6 feet. He's really tough. He's got a good arm.
He can run. He had to run a ton last year.
He did. He was kind of a one-man team with a bad offensive line. So for that reason, I'd be like, yeah, maybe Sam Howell. It's interesting. And not to get you on a side, because we both have been around both of these guys. But when I first saw Sam Howell, he was a quarterback in high school at the Elite 11. And I was like, man, he reminds me a lot of Baker. He was similar size. He was impressive watching him throw. And he actually looked a little like Baker.
Not as much of the red ass as Baker, though.
No, and I'm glad you said that. So fast forward, whatever it is, 4 years or 4 years. He was a counselor at the Elite 11 last summer in Southern California. I spent a decent amount of time with him. And I was like, he's nothing like Baker personality-wise.
Yeah.
Nothing. He looks physically a little like him, but he's nothing like him. Now you can take that however you want to take it.
Well, see, I think the red ass helps make Baker better.
It did. It certainly helped him at Oklahoma.
Yeah.
You know, and look, I mean, I know people in the NFL feel a certain way about Baker. I mean, you know, I was always impressed with Baker. I thought how he handled some awkward stuff was really good. I was like, you know, if Baker turns out to never be this is as good as his NFL gets, I'll be a little surprised, just because I thought he had such an it factor, and he does have a good arm. And if it didn't work out, that's surprise. I mean, I didn't think
through injury last year too.
What's that?
He was playing through injury last year too.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't think he was can't miss, but and so saying all that, I don't know if I would put Sam Howell to that degree of like, hey, I think he's going to be a good NFL starting quarterback. I don't know if it'll be great, but I think he'll be good. I don't know. I would. I mean, where are you on this? I would lean towards Kenny Pickett of this group.
I think Matt Corral. I would start Matt Corral. Now, I realize schematically he's got a little bit to work on, but so does Sam Howell. I mean, both of them we're in offenses that are not going to be the same as an NFL offense in terms of setting protections and all that stuff. But Corral with the quick release, and I thought it was interesting in your story, you had people saying that his release is almost too quick, like that he had ratcheted it up to such a point that it's so quick that he can barely get anything on the ball. But yeah, I think his improvisational skill is important when in the NFL, you're not going to have a clean pocket most times.
The part that I would buy that, like there's some people who are a little concerned about, his maturity or his off field, because as one of the guys who put it in one of my stories before, he's had a really bumpy path that he's come through.
Yeah, but not recently. Recently, he's been model citizen.
Hey, maybe a year ago, it would be more of a concern than it is now. The one concern I would have with him more than any other is he is, no doubt, he's really tough. He plays like a middle linebacker. He is not built like one. He is still pretty slight. I don't know how much bigger he's going to get. And we're not talking about, like, remember when Jared Goff came out? Jared Goff, people were like, oh, he's kind of thin or whatever. Jared Goff does not
no, he's not running into people.
No. And I think Matt Corral's, and he can learn from this and unwind his, motor on this maybe a little bit. But I would be worried about how well he's going to last. Like, he's going to be the guy, I think, because of his fire inside, is going to write checks that his body eventually will not be able to cash in the NFL.
Yeah, see, I'm with you that Malik would be my career guy, but I don't want to play him right away. Like, I would do the red shirt thing like the Chiefs did with Mahomes, or the Eagles did most of that first season with Jalen Hurts, and try to build something around him and help him adjust to what he's expected to do in the NFL, because it seems like he has the highest ceiling of the bunch. He's definitely got the best arm, he's probably the best athlete as well. But that's why I think the Falcons, so you got Marcus Mariota. You decided to move on from Matt Ryan. You could take Malik, who is a hometown guy. And I do think a homegrown quarterback for the Falcons, like an Atlanta guy starting a quarterback for the Falcons as a franchise QB, it's a good business decision.
Well, the other thing,
he's that guy.
The other thing that's good about it, Andy, I wasn't, thinking along the lines, as soon as you said it, then something clicked in, which is a few years ago, I remember, just even talking to coaches in the Pac-12 about Tyler Huntley. And Tyler Huntley's a really good backup for Lamar Jackson, because he's not as fast as Lamar, but he is tough and he can run. Yeah. And it's like, not like you're bringing in Matt Barkley to try to fill in this system. So now all of a sudden you got Marcus Mariota, who's got wheels.
Right.
And now you're bringing in a guy who can really run, who is built like a linebacker. And I think Marcus is he's not an ego guy at all. And I think that could be a really good fit there in terms of that, and what you can do if you're going to, you have a coach who's got a good reputation with, he did a really good job with Tannehill, who, by the way, is also really athletic, and kind of elevated his career. I like that fit. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I
don't either. It's still a big leap of faith when you look at the quarterback class of 2023 and you see CJ Stroud and Bryce Young and maybe Tyler Van Dyke and maybe, there's could be Donovan Smith from Texas Tech if he blossoms, and there's a lot of kind of physically what you want, or just skill wise what you want.
There's a really big quarterback
Sitting out there.
in Gainesville in the pipeline too, correct?
There is Anthony Richardson. If he blows up, I mean, they're going to look at him and go 6'5", 245. Wow.
Yeah, there's another one too that I don't know where he's going to be in terms of like development wise, but I would keep an eye on Will Levis. Will Levis has a cannon for an arm. He can run. He's played a year and he didn't have a spring, but he played a year in Liam Cohen's offense, which had a lot more NFL concepts than what Kentucky was doing before. Now Liam's moved on, but they still brought it in.
Brought somebody in from the Shanahan tree, so it just continues.
Yeah, so I wouldn't. I mean, one of those guys. I don't want to hijack your podcast in this direction.
Hijack away.
We always talk about who's that quarterback who's going to blow up, like Joe Burrow did, or in this case, like like you could say Zach Wilson, or certainly even Kenny Pickett, because nobody had Kenny Pickett as a first-round pick.
Could it be Dylan Gabriel?
Maybe it could be Dylan Gabriel, but I actually would say, hey, if you ask me who's my long shot, I would say keep an eye on Will Levis. I mean,
I think that's a really good one. And what if Spencer Rattler has a good year at South Carolina? I mean, there's a lot of potentially very good quarterbacks in the draft class of 2023. Guys I named who may not even be in the draft next year. But those are, you look at like Tyler Van Dyke. You look at him, the size, the tools, the way he came in, and Miami suddenly got real good. Like that leads me to believe that there's a deep class next year. And Hendon Hooker, even at Tennessee, you see him in person, you're like, whoa, I didn't know this dude was this big. He's 6'4", 220.
And he looks small compared to the other guy that was starting.
Yeah, Joe Milton's massive, but yeah. So you look at that and you say, okay, that could be a really deep class, which could, if you are on the fence this year and you have somebody you feel can get you through this year, which like the Falcons with Mariota, then I don't know that you do anything. Like the Steelers, it feels like they've kind of put themselves in a position where they need to pick a quarterback. But a lot of these other teams, they can probably get away. And remember, Baker's still out there. Garoppolo's still out there. These are people they could go get and have them play this year. So we'll see if they're willing to pull the trigger on those QBs. A class of position group that is much deeper and there are many more sure things in it. Receivers. I was laughing as I'm going down your list of receivers that you asked different scouts and coaches about, because obviously Garrett Wilson, Jameson Williams, Drake, Chris Olave. These are all people who are going to be first-round draft picks who everything they've done feels like they will be productive NFL players. So Drake London, but then Treylon Burks, Jahan Dotson, George Pickens, the list goes on. Britton Covey, Wandel Robinson.
Yeah, people really like Sky Moore. From the MAC. The other guy people really like, and it's a guy college football fans know a lot about or have seen for a while. John Mechie kind of gets forgotten.
David Bell too.
Yeah, but people really, really like
Mechie.
John Mechie. They think he's just good at everything. I think he's impressed people when they study him. There's a handful of guys who's like, even there's another one that I didn't include in the story. There was just because it was someone we lost for space. There was a receiver coach I talked to who's really high on Alec Pierce from Cincinnati. He's he played linebacker briefly in college, former volleyball player, really explosive athlete. He was one of my freaks list guys. They think he'd be a great special teams player. They think there's a lot there. There's just a bunch of guys where you may see in third, fourth round that are end up having really, really good careers that maybe get overshadowed by, Jameson Williams and especially the two Ohio State guys.
Is this one of those things where you kind of feel like, unless you're absolutely sure this is your guy at the top, in the top / middle of the first round, that you just let it go because you're going to be able to get somebody productive later?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. I mean, there are certain guys where, like I had somebody kind of go off about like Velus Jones, started his career at USC.
Tennessee.
South, and then, went back there, really good with the ball in his hands. I think one thing that is like, I don't want to say it's opened more people's eyes, but when you see what Deebo Samuel does for a team, I think there are people looking and go, man, this guy's got really good
Mhm.
Good with the ball in his hands. He can do a lot of different things. And the question is it like Kadarius Toney, where it's like that's right now all he can do? Or
Yeah.
there's a guy at North Dakota State, Christian Watson, who our colleague Max Olson did a really good story on, and he is a big size speed guy. Now they worry a little bit about like, does he have natural hands? Sometimes the ball ricochet off his helmet, but those are, he can get better at it because we've seen guys develop, by just catching and catching and catching.
What about like a Wandel Robinson? Does it, because we've seen what teams can do with Debo and Cordero Patterson, which is a bigger, and maybe Traylon Burks could be that guy. But
He's
like,
even
what about
better.
a
Yeah.
Wandel Robinson? You can get him the ball in a variety of ways, and it feels like he can make yards for you.
Yeah. And one of the coaches I talked to was very specific about, I don't think he's a like a draftable guy if he's still at Nebraska. He went to Kentucky, they put him in more of a pro style system, and he flourished. And there, it wasn't like there was other great skill guys outside. But I think he's a guy who definitely will be, interesting to people. You remember like Rondell Moore had this great, start of his career at
Yep.
Purdue. And I think he's a really explosive guy. People look at and go, I mean, he will help you in some way. There are
Yeah.
guys like that. You look at, I mean, obviously Tyreek Hill is super fast and a little different, but then there is, there's other guys who, the Rams gobble up who are like, yeah, they're almost like little running backs that they find a way, whether it's like a Dante Hall-ish kind of weapon
Hmm.
that they can do a bunch of stuff with. And I think if my team got Wandel Robinson, I don't know, the third or fourth round, I'd be like, ooh, I think that's going to be a good pick for us.
So I asked Dane Brugler this too, and I'm curious for you. Of all these folks that are in the draft this year, who's been your favorite to watch? Who's the one that you just get a kick out of watching them play, whether it's a lineman mauling people or a receiver making moves? For me, it's Chris Olave. Like just watching Chris Olave get open is like watching poetry.
Yeah, I mean, the video of Ickey mauling people is something to see, just like, and again, I feel like I almost have like the connection just because there was an element of discovery with him. And I can still hear, one of his coaches sent me like really bad quality camera phone video of Ickey in the race. And you just hear a kid in the background losing his mind, and his voice is changing. And I can still hear that. And the quality was so bad, I don't think we could run it with the story. It was almost like what were those little flip phones, the StarTech.
Oh yeah, yeah. The StarTAC, the
But,
razor.
no, I want to see Britton Covey in a preseason game because I think he's going to return a touchdown. People go like, yeah, that little 147-pound guy did,
Exactly.
like if you want to be entertained, go watch Britton Covey's high school film. It's 14 minutes long. It is wild to see, like, he's basically the Noel Devine of of Utah, just running all over people. He's a quarterback. Like I watch it with my kid, and he's a quarterback. I haven't seen one pass yet. I'm like, stick around. It was like 11 minutes in. He has to throw it. And I asked one of the receivers coaches about Britton. He was like, he's tiny, man. He's going to get pinballed around in there, but he'll be a return guy, and he may stick. Just because if you can make a difference, now it's a little different. There's less kickoffs in the NFL, but he would be one of my favorite guys just because having lived on the West Coast, I was around him in a decent amount, and he was just a vivacious. I don't think I've ever described anybody with that word. Vivacious personality. Just and that was kind of what he was like. He was just like, have you ever had him on your podcast?
I have not. I'd love
Good,
to. I mean,
dude.
I would love to know what an eighth year starter sounds
He,
like.
he is just like a bundle of energy. He described, he's like, my wife said, I'm like, she goes, it's like being married to a golden retriever,
That's exactly right. By the way, I found the video of Ickey running the anchor leg, and he's just running this dude down. It is spectacular.
Yeah, the kid who shot it, just losing his mind. I'll send you the audio of it. I think I still have it somewhere. It's just nuts.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And this is one of my favorite parts of the draft because you realize just how great these people are as athletes. Like, and not just the first rounders, but all the way through to Reese's point, you have to be an incredible athlete. And so you see crazy stuff like this. And I can't wait to see what they do.
Andy, your guy should be Connor Hayward.
Oh
Connor
yeah.
Hayward, like I remember doing something with the Senior Bowl guys in midseason, and they talked about him. Like, do you remember when like Mark Jackson, the basketball player who's now the announcer, he had a brother who was like, I don't know, 6'3", 370 pounds, who was playing basketball. When you see like somebody, like remember Tractor Trailer a little bit?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I loved him.
Like Barkley, where it's like they don't, and I'm not saying like Connor Hayward's obese or anything like that, but like the fact that he can do things that you like athletically that you would just not expect to see out of that body,
Yeah.
is always like, there's always like you kind of get a kick out of it, and that's a guy who I think should be on that list somewhere.
Well, it's I mean, shoot, Evan Neal. I think a lot of people's introduction to Evan Neal. Now, the Recruitniks already knew about Evan Neal, but was when the strength coach Matt Ray, who's now with the Saints, but when he was the strength coach at Alabama, he puts out the video of Evan Neal doing the split jump onto the platforms, and you're just like, how is he doing this at 360 pounds?
I know, it's insane. It is insane to see what some of these gigantic people can do. And that is definitely high on the list.
Well, Bruce, it has been a pleasure. And if you have not read Bruce's Draft Confidential on The Athletic, what are you doing? Get there now. If you're a subscriber, great. Just click on it. If you're not, you can get a subscription for $1 a month for your first 6 months. Once you read this, you will be as prepared as humanly possible for the draft, except if you need it. Dane Brugler wrote you a whole book called The Beast. So get that and get on that before the draft. There it is. Bruce has got The Beast. It's incredible. I've never felt so lazy as I feel every year when The Beast comes out.
Yeah, I think it's called The Beast because it is a beast to probably edit for somebody to go. I mean, like it's an insane amount of work, but it's just such a great resource because you'll find yourself going, I wonder what they think of so-and-so or whatever. Some player who's probably going to be a 7th round pick or, whatever. And I just think it's like, never mind just the next, later this week. I just think it's something you can always go back as a resource.
Oh, Dane would not be satisfied if there was a draft where somebody got picked who wasn't in The Beast. So they're all going to be in there. Every single person, right down to Mr. Irrelevant. So if you're not subscribing to The Athletic, get there now because you are going to be so prepared for this draft. And then once your team has its picks, you can learn about every single person who's getting on your team. Bruce Feldman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Andy. I look forward to seeing you very soon.
Yes, sir.